the Department of Education. This is a hybrid hearing, so we need to address a few housekeeping matters. For members joining virtually, once you start speaking, there is a slight delay before you are displayed on the main screen. Speaking into the microphone activates the camera, displaying the speaker on the main screen. Do not stop your remarks if you do not immediately see the screen switch. If the screen does not change after several seconds, please make sure that you are not muted. To minimize background noise and ensure the correct speaker is being displayed, we ask that you remain on mute unless you have sought recognition. The chair or an individual designated by the chair may mute participants' microphones when they are not under recognition to eliminate inadvertent background noise. Members who are virtual are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. Finally, House rules require me to remind you that we have set up an email address to which members can send anything they wish to submit in writing at any of our hearings. That email address has been provided in advance to your staff. Before I move into my remarks, I just want to acknowledge that today is the birthday of our ranking member, Congressman Cole, so we want to wish you all a very, very happy birthday. Congressman Cole, we're not going to ask you anything about age or any of those things, but we wish you a wonderful, wonderful day. And I hope there is bourbon and cigars somewhere in the day. Time. Okay, this is great. This is great. I also want to say, and I think Josh Harder, maybe, virtual or and we want to welcome Josh back, who has been, as he explained to me yesterday, changing diapers and staying up late and taking on his responsibilities as a dad. So welcome back, Josh. So let me acknowledge the ranking member of the subcommittee, Tom Cole, and all of the members who are joining today's hearing, both virtually and in person. And I would very much like to welcome Secretary Miguel Cardona to his first in-person hearing of the subcommittee as Secretary of the Department of Education. You were with us virtually last year, but there is nothing like being in person. So a very, very warm welcome.
Thank you.
There is little more critical to our growth and progress as a nation than support for the educational success of our students. If the last 2 years have proven anything, it is that as we struggle to overcome moments of so much change, we have a moral responsibility to ensure that our students and the families and teachers that support them every day have the resources to succeed and to flourish. Schools and learning provide consistency. As educator Horace Mann said, and I quote, "Education, beyond all other divides of human origin, is a great equalizer." And I would add, is a great constant in the constantly changing world. Secretary Cardona, you have proven over the last year and throughout your career as a Connecticut educator to be a fighter for the programs and policies that give our students and our teachers the certainty that they need for success. Next week is Teacher Appreciation Week, a moment to celebrate and to recognize you, Mr. Secretary, and the millions of teachers around the country who dedicate their lives to educating our students. And you and I both know the incredible sacrifice that being an educator entails, which is why the work that you do to support our teachers as they transform students' lives is so crucial. I also want to acknowledge our parents who have struggled to get their kids educated throughout the pandemic. And we agree they should have a big role and a big say in their children's education. There are some today who are trying to divide parents and teachers. But by design, our public school systems require significant input from local communities and parents. Nationwide, there are 13,500 school districts with about 90,000 school board members. Around 90% of these school board members are directly elected by their communities. 1/3 of school board members are parents of students in schools or preschools, with over 90% of those students attending schools in the districts that their parents represent. I also get troubled by broader efforts to ban content. That is divisive. The banning of books from public schools and libraries, restricting free speech and access to books is divisive, and it impedes the development of our children. That also must hold at universities and in university libraries, where freedom of expression is under attack. This too limits the growth and development of the next generation. And we should not ally critical race theory with students learning about our history. America has a complicated history, but America is exceptional. American freedoms grew out of our history, dealing with Native Americans, immigration, and slavery. And somehow we keep bending the arc toward progress and greater equality. Strengthening our educational system and our students' learning begins with a strong Department of Education. So I thank you, Mr. Secretary, for joining us to discuss the Department's fiscal year 2023 budget. It builds on the transformative investments we have made over the past year. Under your and President Biden's leadership, historic progress has already begun to improve the lives of our nation's students, educators, and their families. This work began with $170 billion in the American Rescue Plan funds that were secured by congressional Democrats and President Biden, who moved quickly to reopen public schools, provide emergency grants directly to students, and assist colleges and universities in giving support to students in need. The Biden administration has also taken swift action to ensure student borrowers are not denied the benefits that they are entitled to. With improvements to the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, $6.8 billion in loan debt has been canceled for more than 113,000 public servants, and the administration's new waiver for borrowers in income-driven repayment will bring another 3.6 million Americans closer to loan forgiveness. And the days of the fox guarding the henhouse at the department are over. You have advanced strong proposed regulations that will protect students and taxpayers from predatory for-profit colleges, providing relief to the student borrowers that they have defrauded. And despite bad faith arguments by some, you have proposed reasonable measures that will increase accountability and transparency in the charter school program. Mr. Secretary, I applaud you and the President for your unprecedented support of our students, public schools, colleges, and universities. We have so much more to do as we continue reversing decades of underinvestment in our federal education system, which is why I am so proud that Congress, led by this committee, passed in a bipartisan way the 2022 government funding omnibus bill last month, which included historic funding, including an increase of $2.9 billion for programs under the Department of Education. I'm especially proud of the $1 billion increase included for Title I to support low-income students in our nation's public schools, the largest increase in over a decade. And again, on a bipartisan basis. No child in this country should be denied a quality of education because of where they were born, their family's income, or their race or ethnicity. And with an increase of $448 million for special education programs, we are also recommitting ourselves to improving the lives of babies, children, and young adults with disabilities. As chair of the subcommittee, I was excited as we created an initiative on special social and emotional learning and whole child approaches, which we funded now for the third year in a row. We have included $82 million for evidence-based SEL grants, $85 million for teacher and school leader development that prioritizes SEL training, $111 million for school-based mental health professional grants, and an increase of $90 million and $75 million for full-service community schools, an increase of $45 million. These programs support students' social, emotional, and cognitive development and positively impact their academic performance and well-being. Earlier this year, we held a hearing on these strategies where we examined the overwhelming evidence, the evidence base behind these interventions, and we heard how these effective strategies are needed now more than ever, considering the extreme stress and hardship our country's most vulnerable students have faced during the COVID-19 pandemic. And to make higher education accessible to even more students, we were proud to fight for and deliver the largest increase in over a decade to the maximum Pell Grant, a $400 increase. We delivered $96 million to historically Black colleges and universities and minority-serving institutions. We are proud of these critical investments, which will make college more affordable for historically underserved students and their families. Alongside the Department of Education programs, for the first time in 12 years, we included member funding for projects to directly support students and educators in our home districts. We were able to meet the needs of communities all across our nation through district-specific funding for programs that support students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, mentorship, tutoring initiatives, college success, and learning loss programs for underserved students. In my own district, $2 million will help the New Haven Public Schools as they expand job development opportunities for high school students interested in a career in the manufacturing sector with a new Manufacturing Education and Pathways program. As we begin the 2023 budget process, we need to build on these critical investments to help even more students and families to achieve that American dream. And I'm pleased to see such a strong budget request to do just that. The President's 2023 request includes $88.3 billion for the Department of Education. It's an increase of $11.9 billion, 16% above the 2022 level. It would continue to build on the historic investments we've made in Title I, the cornerstone of our federal support for public education. It provides an additional $3 billion discretionary increase to support our students and those schools that are most in need. The request also prioritizes support for our students with disabilities with a $2.9 billion increase to IDEA Part B grants to states for special education services and a critical $436 million increase for IDEA grants for infants and families for early intervention services available to children with disabilities aged birth through 2 and their families. And it supports English learners and immigrant students with a $244 million increase for English language acquisition program. Transformative $393 million increase for community schools will provide critical, comprehensive services and expand evidence-based models that meet the holistic needs of children, families, and communities. Your budget recognizes the immense value of higher education by providing key investments to make college more affordable and accessible for low-income and minority students. I'm pleased to see a $500 increase to the discretionary Pell Grant Maximum Award, an additional $249 million for HBCUs, MSIs, and other under-resourced institutions. We will continue to meet the needs of low-income, first-generation students and narrow our nation's racial wealth gap and expand access to employment. Mr. Secretary, the work that you do and the rest of the administration do day in and day out touches the lives of every single student and educator. The investments in this budget request and our support for our students and our teachers ensure that our government will get one step closer to leveling the playing field so that every child and every student has a fair shot that allows for their God-given talent to help the opportunities that are created so they can flourish in our society today. I look forward to working with you over the next year, looking forward to our discussion this morning, and thank you for being here today. And with that, let me recognize our ranking member, Congressman Cole, who has a very strong commitment to public education and the opportunities that it opens up and provides for our children. I'd like to yield to the ranking member for his opening remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and you've been so kind to wish me a happy birthday, but this is a much more important day than my birthday. It's the first meeting of the Big Four.
That's right.
So
That's
I
later
wish
today.
you well
Thank you.
later today
Thank you.
as you sit down, and I want to take...
What do we think about bourbon and cigars for that meeting?
I tell you what, it would go a lot better. I'd be happy to send you in with all you need if you think that'll loosen them up. But I want to, again, take a minute before I get to my prepared remarks and just thank you again for getting us through the last process. You and Ranking Member Granger working together, I think, were critical to that. I think this committee took the leadership role, quite frankly, in pushing the process forward, and nobody did that more than you. And I'm glad to see it starting a little bit earlier this year, and everybody's worked together. So I'll make a commitment to once again try to work with you and make sure that we get this budget done, hopefully within the fiscal year, but if not, certainly within the calendar year. I think it'd be a huge mistake for this budget to go into next year, and that's something we should all want to avoid. That's not fair to the administration. It slows them up in terms of making important decisions. It's not fair to the next Congress. They shouldn't have to vote on appropriations bills that they were not here to be part of. So I take considerable pride in the fact that for 7 years in a row, you and I have managed to get this bill across the line. Didn't matter who was chairman, didn't matter who was ranking member, didn't matter which party controlled Congress, it didn't matter what the administration was. We've gotten it done under every conceivable scenario, and I would certainly like to make it 8 in a row. And I want to thank you for being such a good negotiating partner and such a good leader for this full committee in terms of us forcing our sometimes slower moving Senate colleagues to actually do the work that they were elected to do. Mr. Secretary, it is very good to see you this morning, and we don't always agree, but I always find you agreeable and professional and particularly accessible to this committee, and I appreciate that very much. COVID's been a difficult time, but you've always made time. Anytime we've had questions or comments or whatever, and I appreciate the spirit in which you approach your job. And again, welcome to, as the chairwoman said, it's great to get to deal with you in person and as many of our members as can be here in person. I'll start by once again expressing concern regarding the total level of spending proposed by the administration. I've been a long-time supporter of helping achieve better outcomes for our students, but I fear the proposed 15% increase for the Department of Education will leave the next generation saddled with the highest national debt our nation has ever seen. The fiscal year 2022 budget was just completed last month. We know it will take some time to get those funds out the door. A more moderate approach, in my view, is called for, especially in this time of runaway inflation. I'd like to turn next to the topic of which I believe is one of the greatest failures of the federal response to the COVID pandemic, and that's the closing of many of our nation's public schools for almost 2 years and the subsequent lost student learning and mental health issues that are flowing from these bad decisions. Your budget proposes increases in mental health and counseling to help with these issues, and I appreciate that. But the sad truth is we can never give those children back those years of their lives, and some of these wounds may never heal. In many cases, a growing love of learning in an adolescent, progress a student with a disability was making, or basic skills that were beginning to be solidified by a young student may have been lost forever. A recent survey conducted by the Government Accountability Office highlighted just how widespread and profound these losses are. Their survey discovered that nearly half of public school teachers had students who were registered for class but literally never showed up online. Even more disturbing, students who never showed up came mostly from majority non-white urban schools. These are the very students that our federal programs are in place to support, and I think our country will be seeing the negative consequences from school closures for years and years to come. So I certainly hope it's an experience. I know we all share this hope that we don't have to go through again. I will also ask some questions this morning on what I believe to be executive overreach on the charter schools policy. One of the greatest benefits of the charter school movement has been the fact that these schools are locally developed, authorized, and operated. The federal role in charter schools has been one of providing limited financial support to secure physical infrastructure and some startup grant funding. But the Department of Education is not a national school board or a national chartering authority. I agree with the 18 Republican governors who have recently called for your department to pull back proposed regulations that would, as they say, quote, impose a top-down, one-size-fits-all approach and undermine the authority of parents to choose the educational options best suited for their child, unquote. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit for the record a letter from our former colleague, now Governor Jared Polis, which outlines very well his objections and concerns to administration actions. Is that all right, Ms. Sifton? Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My own state of Oklahoma has a long history in the charter school movement, and I believe that states, not the U.S. Department of Education, should continue to be responsible for what charters they do or do not authorize to operate within their jurisdiction. I'd also like to touch today on another area of executive overreach, and that's the President's recent decision to extend the student loan repayment pause to August 31st. Not only is this inflationary, but there are also people making literally hundreds of thousands of dollars a year who aren't being asked to repay their student loans. I think that's unfair. And I've introduced legislation called the, quote, Can't Cancel Your Own Debt Act to prohibit members of Congress from voting to forgive their own student loans. These folks are making $174,000 a year. Even if a member favored debt cancellation for most people, we should not support this policy for people making this type of salary at the expense of our taxpayers and constituents. Finally, I hope to discuss today another area which greatly concerns me, and that's the politicization of programs like civics education with controversial priorities in grant announcements. Programs like civics education should be used to bring our country together and focus on our own commonalities while teaching respect for our differences. Sadly, I fear that recent announcements put out by the administration have only fanned the flames of controversy and division rather than healed them. That's a disappointment. In closing, I'd like to say that as a longtime member of this subcommittee, I understand the important role played by domestic programs, and I certainly support increases for these critical programs. I was pleased to see support for special education in your budget. We know the federal government has not upheld its fair share of responsibility for ensuring education is provided for students with a disability. And I hope we can see achieving support for sustained increases for special education as a bipartisan goal. I also believe in strong support for Pell Grant recipients and the TRIO and Gear Up programs. Pell Grants and participation in TRIO and Gear Up help first-generation college students chart a course to a better future into the middle class. We need to continue to help these students not only enroll, but also graduate and find good-paying jobs. Unfortunately, our double-digit inflation is eating away at the salaries of these recent graduates and making it more difficult for them to establish themselves in their careers. I also believe that we should do more to help underserved populations in underperforming schools. I support programs to strengthen our teachers and school leaders, and I support the Title I program. But I also question whether simply dumping billions of dollars into the program without careful planning is the best way to help undo the damage caused by 2 years of school closure. I want to again thank you, Mr. Secretary. Again, as I said, while we don't always agree, I do enjoy working with you, and I do appreciate the manner in which you approach your job and in which you represent the department. I yield back the balance of my time, Madam Chair.
Thank the ranking member, and Mr. Secretary, let me recognize you, and your full written testimony will be entered into the record. You're recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairwoman DeLauro, Ranking Member Cole, members of this distinguished subcommittee. Good morning and thank you. And Mr. Cole, I would sing happy birthday, but the clock is running and I have 5 minutes. Today's hearing is more than the President's budget and proposed investments for the fiscal year 2023. It's about the needs of our students and how we can meet them if we work together. The priorities in the budget reflect what I've learned in my visits to 32 states across America this past year. I visited schools in small towns and affluent suburbs, urban and rural communities, including tribal communities. And I know that addressing opportunity and achievement gaps is more important now than ever. I've met with parents in Nevada worried about their kids catching up in the classroom. The gaps in underserved communities are so much greater now. Let's close those opportunity gaps by boldly investing in our Title I schools. This is our best tool for reducing inequities between underfunded schools and their wealthier counterparts. Let's also invest in full-service community schools, which provide high-poverty communities with easier access for services like health and nutrition, enrichment, adult education, and more. Last week in New Mexico, I met with students struggling with anxiety. They had depression, trauma from losing parents amid the pandemic. Our children are hurting. Anxiety and depression have doubled among youth. Teen suicide rates are up. It's heartbreaking. Let's do something about it. Let's invest $1 billion in hiring staff and building their skill set to support students' mental health needs so they can be their best in the classroom. I met with superintendents and principals in red states and in blue states trying to fill vacancies so that teachers could spend more time providing that individualized attention that our students need now. The teaching profession is in crisis, and we have a solution. Let's support and grow our educator workforce. We are proposing $500 million for education, innovation, and research grants, including $350 million for recruiting and retaining teachers. Remember what it was like when we couldn't open our schools because of teacher and sub shortages. Let's not go back to that. Let's invest in teacher quality partnership grants so more states can stand up innovative teacher residencies and grow your own programs that prepare new and diverse candidates, like the programs I saw in Tennessee. What I haven't heard is an appetite from parents for sowing division in our schools or using our schools for culture wars, or telling students what they can or can't read or can't learn, or telling teachers what they can't teach, or telling any person what they can or can't be. I know there are some that would rather distract and divide and spread misinformation to undermine our public schools and gain attention, but that's not what the parents that I've spoken to told me they want. That's not what I want. Based on a recent survey, the overwhelming majority of parents, teachers, principals are on the same page about what children need in our schools. Our parents need their children to learn. The American Rescue Plan got us this far. Today, our schools are open for in-person learning, and our teachers are steeped in the work of recovery. Now is our opportunity to reimagine what education can be. With your investments, let's build more inclusive, affordable pathways to higher education and rewarding careers for all of our students. College enrollment has fallen by nearly 1 million students. We can't afford this. Let's invest in community college, historically black colleges and universities, Hispanic serving institutions, tribal colleges, and other inclusive institutions. And let's build on the $400 Pell Grant increase you included in FY22. We could double the Pell Grant by 2029 if we start with another bold increase of $1,775 for this upcoming year. We know that these days a high school diploma is no longer a ticket to the middle class. We shouldn't let any student walk off the graduation stage without an on-ramp to a good-paying job. Therefore, we're proposing $200 million for career-connected learning, so more underserved students graduate high school with industry credentials and college credits. This is good not only for the students, but for the economy. Look, education gave me the tools to achieve the American dream. I grew up in a low-income community. I only had what the public schools offered me at that time. I attended a Title I school, and I graduated from a technical high school. I became a first-generation college student. I'm a bilingual certified educator who benefited from quality teacher preparation and professional development. I'm a product of the investments in this budget. Education brought the promise of the American dream alive for me. We must renew that promise for today's students and those to come. This last year, we fought hard against COVID. Together, this upcoming year, let's fight complacency. Let's not accept a culture of low expectations. Let's not return to the systems that weren't working for all students. Who here in this room hasn't wished for a reset button in education? A chance to take stock of our system and reimagine what it can be. Well, our country's at a point of inflection. Let's use it to reimagine education, to show the American people we can come together, red and blue, we can come together to fight for what's right for our students. This budget is a chance to do that. So together, let's seize the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. And I know you've been a proponent of keeping our schools open and happy to say that it was the American Rescue Plan that accelerated the opening of our schools nationwide. Mr. Secretary, I strongly support the department's modest, what I believe are modest good government proposals for the 2022 charter school program competitions. However, the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools has been spreading wild exaggerations and misrepresentations in opposition. This kind of information campaign is a familiar tactic for the trade organization. It does represent charter schools that are run by risky, low-quality, for-profit education management organizations. And I'll just cite a couple of the examples of the recent expansion grant awards that were made to something like, the Torchlight Academy Charter School in North Carolina, now being shut down. Capital Collegiate Preparatory Academy in Ohio has been passed from one for-profit operator to another. A New York school, they have oversized fees for its services. So as I point out, the modest, what I believe are modest good government proposals for your charter school reform, what I would like to do is to ask you, what are the new proposed requirements in the charter school program, and why are they necessary?
Thank you for the question. I appreciate an opportunity to speak to this because there have been some misunderstandings and, quite frankly, some myths being spread. I support all high-quality schools, including public charter schools. The budget continues the charter school program investment of $440 million. I think the proposals are reasonable. And what they ask for is greater accountability, transparency, and fiscal responsibility. Again, they're proposals at this point. And it's absolutely accurate that we do not authorize charter schools. If anything, when using federal dollars, we do want there to be reasonable expectations around accountability, transparency, and fiscal responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Let me just, I also, to move in a similar direction, concerned by the proliferation of contracts between universities and online program management companies, OPMs. We had a Wall Street Journal investigation exposed how the University of Southern California and a for-profit OPM known as 2U recruited thousands of students to an expensive online graduate program, which left student borrowers with a median debt of $112,000 and median earnings of $52,000 2 years later. And by the way, they received 60% of the program's total revenue because they shouldered the cost of setting up the program in exchange for getting a cut of the tuition, and calculated, USC could have been generating about $142 million for their for-profit company in 2021. What will the department do to protect students from the OPM-stoked cost escalation and recruiting abuses? And the Wall Street Journal did a very fine piece on this on this issue.
Thank you for raising that issue. It's really important that we maintain a posture of support for students, and that we, in all the decisions we make, are protecting our students, protecting our borrowers. We've worked really hard this last year to move forward with policies and practices that keep our borrowers first, including borrower defense. But one specific thing that I want to talk to regarding that is we reinstated our Office of Enforcement in the FSA office. This office was disbanded, and we brought it back to make sure that things like that are not happening, and making sure that we're protecting our students. We're also in communication with college presidents to monitor situations like this because students aren't benefiting. We're going to continue with our borrower defense, but we're also going to make sure we're having communication with universities so these things are not happening. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I would just say with regard to that, first, this is about harming student borrowers, but it is also about ripping off federal taxpayers, right, because the issue is with the what's being proposed are the federal Grad Plus program that exists there. It lets students borrow as much as colleges charge. It's provided a valuable revenue stream for universities, and that leaves students in debt and a greater proportion of revenue for the university. So again, I would just like to say to you and ask the department to take that lead in protecting students from these agreements and protecting the integrity of the student loan program for federal taxpayers. It is about students and the federal dollars that we are expending, and happy to do if they're going to good causes in that effort. So I thank you, and with that, I'm going to yield to my colleague, the ranking member, and also ask my colleague, I have to dash to the Ag Subcommittee for a few minutes, and I will be back, so I'm going to ask Congresswoman Roybal Allard to continue to chair the meeting. Thank you. This way.
Can you get by?
Yes, I can.
Okay. You're thinner than me.
Mr. Cole?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, 18 governors sent you a letter this month outlining their concerns with new regulations altering the charter school program. Quite frankly, the regulations, in our view, would dismantle, frankly, a successful federal, state, and local partnership that really has enabled millions of children to have a public education, but in a setting that, in their view and their parents' view, best fits their needs. Will you extend the comment period for these regulations to reflect the magnitude of the changes and to allow more time for public input?
Thank you, Ranking Member Cole. As I said before, I do support high-quality public charter schools, and I've seen examples of their effectiveness. We have had the public comment, and we are reviewing the comments now. We've received the letters. So we do have a process for reviewing comments that have been submitted.
And I recognize, but I would hope you would extend that. I think, again, when you're hearing from nearly 20 governors, and frankly, not all Republicans. Obviously, our friend Mr. Paulus is not a Republican governor, but he certainly was a very able member of this body, very respected governor. So I would ask you to at least consider that. And I'd like to know what your attitudes are in terms of regulations that limit local control, including the new requirement for community impact analysis, which would mandate school districts be over-enrolled, if I understand it correctly. And, why would we do that? Why wouldn't we just let local people make their own decisions as to what's best for their kids?
We do agree, and I can tell you personally, I do agree as a former district person that local decisions should be the ones that are driving, and I certainly continue to support that. What I do think we have are reasonable expectations around getting an understanding of what the needs are in the community as a proposal to make sure that there's interest and make sure that the schools stay open. We want to make sure that these schools stay open.
Yeah, and I would like you to at least consider delaying changes to the program. These are pretty major changes until next fiscal year, so that we can continue to operate this year under a system everybody understands. I know there's never a convenient time to make a change if that's the decision that's ultimately made, but I think it takes a lot of time to adjust to that, and whether or not we could implement, and frankly, I hope we don't, because obviously I don't agree with a lot of these proposals, this in a timely way, and give administrators and students, local school officials an opportunity to adjust. I think in the time frame is something worth considering. Is that something you have concerns about?
Thank you, Mr. Cole. We will take that into consideration and make sure that we are providing adequate technical assistance to all of the folks we serve.
Let me ask you something that caught my eye, because this is a very robust budget. But in two areas, you actually reduced spending, I think, by about $3 million in Indian education, about $16 million in impact aid. I will tell you, I have district concerns in both those areas. We have, as you know, a large Native population in Oklahoma. And second, my district has two huge military facilities that frankly draw a lot of kids into local schools, but obviously those facilities don't pay any state or local taxes. We get that. We're very proud to have them, but we certainly appreciate impact aid to help us offset the cost of those students that come with the service families that are located there, or even the civilian workforce.
Thank you for that, and I couldn't agree with you more. I was able to visit Knob Noster High School recently, 100% of the students were military-connected families. And let me tell you, I heard from students directly, we need to increase impact aid. And that was a community that did a great job. It was in Missouri, did a great job using impact aid. And I last week was in New Mexico in the Pueblo of Jemez, a tribal nation, and I know the importance of funding there. I know the reason why it looks like a cut, it's an artificial cut, is because the submission was done after the 2022 allotment. So it looks like it's a cut, but it's not. We were using 21 numbers because the omnibus hadn't been passed.
Well, I certainly recognize that because we weren't quite as speedy as I know we all would like to be in getting you numbers. And I just want to flag that for you because I will be trying to work with you to get a more appropriate number. Those are areas that have been underfunded. And again, I appreciate the technical difficulties that you had to face putting together your budget before, frankly, we'd finished our deliberation. Yeah. So that's a fair point. I'm close to the end of my time, Madam Chair, so let me yield back.
Mr. Secretary, welcome. As you know, many of our students in higher education are facing the burden of college tuition and rising costs of living, including food, housing, and childcare. This is especially true for the 4 million parenting students who are pursuing a college degree or credential while taking care of a dependent child. According to research from the Hope Center at Temple University, parenting students are much more likely to struggle to find and afford enough to eat for themselves or their families and maintain stable housing. Without proper support, these students are at risk of dropping out of college. And I am happy that the administration is requesting an increase in the C-Campus program. Can you speak to how the C-Campus program helps parenting students and how it can be used also to help connect struggling students to more resources of financial support, as well as programs such as SNAP, WIC, and TANF?
Thank you for that question. The Child Care Access means parents in school, or C-Campus, is something that I was able to see firsthand. And I think we have an opportunity. When I talk about reimagining education, we must look at this as an opportunity to attract students who may not be traditional students. There are many people during the pandemic that had an epiphany and want to change their trajectory in life, and they want to go back to school. And the C-Campus program is one of those programs that I saw firsthand allow parents to go back to college, pursue their degree, chase that dream. I'll speak to a situation that I was able to witness firsthand in Bergen County Community College, where C-Campus was being used to allow parents to attend while their children had childcare on campus. I spoke to a young lady, Kezia, who attended that college, and she and her husband were there, and their twins were down the hall in a child care center being cared for while she was studying. And she said, this C-Campus, these funds are not only allowing me to change the trajectory of my life, but that of my children, her two twins. So for Kezia, she wouldn't be able to go to school if it weren't for C-Campus. I remember visiting Nevada and talking to students there in a community college who they were homeless. And the community college was trying to help them find housing. So they were making connections. We have an opportunity to embrace students who traditionally didn't think of themselves as college students in this new wave now. And I really want to take advantage of it. Programs like C-Campus make that possible.
Now, the FY22 Omnibus actually lifted the cap on C-Campus grants, which limited an institution to receiving only 1% of its Pell Grant receipts. By removing the cap, the Department of Education can now set a higher limit of support for C-Campus. How much of an increase can schools expect to receive, and will there be any changes to the eligibility criteria?
We are requesting a $95 million increase, and we want to make that eligible for as many schools as possible. I can share more information about the criteria for that, but the goal really is to make sure it's available to more students across the country so more can have access to higher education.
This year, you know what, I'm also very close to ending, so I won't take the prerogative of the chair to go over my time, and I will now call on Mr. Fleischman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ranking Member Cole. Mr. Secretary, good morning, sir. Thank you for being with us in person today. Really appreciate this. I think we can all agree that we're glad to be back in person and especially to have our students back, sir, in the classroom for in-person learning. Secretary Cardona, the most recent data shows that 3.5 million STEM-related jobs will need to be filled by 2025 in order to maintain a stable workforce. It is imperative that we continue to support public-private partnerships to close the skills gap and cultivate a diverse workforce. Last week, I was privileged to visit the Middle Valley Elementary School located in Hickson, Tennessee, in my district, to observe their public-private partnership with Amazon, a program that supports almost 175 schools with computer science curriculum, robotics clubs, and other learning opportunities. Actually, it was quite inspirational, very uplifting. What is the administration doing to encourage more public-private partnerships in STEM and computer science literacy? Thank you, sir.
Thank you for that question, Mr. Fleischman. I couldn't agree more with you that we need to do much more. We're not doing enough currently. We need to make sure that our students are connected to great STEM programming within our schools, that are connected to the regional workforce needs, connected to the 2-year programs, the 4-year programs. I'm really excited about the priority of redesigning high schools and providing better career pathways. We've asked in the budget for $200 million for career-connected high schools, new competitive awards that reinforce districts like the one you visited and give them funding to make those programs consistent and grow those programs. We have an opportunity now to reimagine what career pathways look like. Those are one of my priorities at the Department of Education. Not only do we want to address achievement disparities, we want to make sure we're connecting our high schoolers, our college students to careers that exist today in the STEM fields.
Thank you, sir. Follow-up, how can we provide continued professional development in STEM and computer science literacy for our teachers specifically, sir?
Thank you for that. We have to make sure that as we're doing these public-private partnerships, they include providing support for our educators, giving them real-life experiences to see what the jobs look like today, right? So I could envision having one of our teachers partnering with one of these regional workforce partners and having trips for the teacher to see what the site looks like and gain skills there, or something where it's co-taught or an after-school program for professional development for our teachers.
Thank you, sir. And the final question in this for this first one here is how important is early exposure to STEM and computer science curriculum to get students exposed to that early, sir?
Yeah. It is really important that we start early. We have to start in elementary school, and we have to make sure that we're connecting it to real-world experiences, real-world jobs, and by the time they get to middle and high school, students should be exposed to the different careers that there are in STEM, and there are many, and they're growing.
And Mr. Secretary, I'd like to put something on your radar, if I may, and for our other members. I would like to encourage members on this subcommittee to consider co-sponsoring H.R. 3602, the Computer Science for All Act. This is something that actually our distinguished colleague, Ms. Barbara Lee, from the majority, is working with me on. She's the lead Democrat, I'm the lead Republican. The Computer Science for All Act, which provides new grant opportunities that would make computer science education more accessible for all students, pre-K through 12th grade. So, Mr. Secretary, thank you. I'd like you to take a look at that legislation, and I would appreciate members of our subcommittee to take a look at that as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome, Mr. Secretary. We're delighted to have you here. I can't thank you enough for prioritizing the mental health and well-being of our students. In a recent survey out of Massachusetts, 60% of the parents and caregivers reported at least one death in their family, 60%. And we know what a crisis this is. It's a compounding crisis to one we were already facing. And I appreciate the resources that you are putting into this. I want to specifically ask, as we are facing a dual crisis of retaining and recruiting educators. How is your budget also addressing the mental health needs of those educators as you are doing so well with our students?
I appreciate your acknowledgement of the crisis that we're having in mental health. I had a lunch with Dr. Jha yesterday. We were talking about how the crisis went from counting cases to thinking about the impact of mental health on our students, on our staff, on our community in general, and how we must continue to put energy toward addressing that. I'm really proud that with ESSER, thank you for the support of ESSER's, there's a 65% increase already in social workers in our schools, 17% increase in counselors, but we've got ways to go. What we want to do is make sure that we're not just adding one or two more counselors, that we're giving students an opportunity to have mental health support, not only during the school day, but outside of the school. Parents having access to mental health support or being able to access support through connections with the school. We're proposing funds in the FY23 to really make it more foundational in our schools. I'll tell you, Representative Clark, we had mental health issues in our schools that were unaddressed before the pandemic. They were just made worse. But we have a moment now to really make sure it's a foundational support that we provide our students, and I look forward to leading that.
Are we also going to be able to provide that to our educators? Is that part of the plan you're working on?
Without question. You know, we cannot act as if only our students suffered during the pandemic. I've spoken to teachers in all of my visits who are doing everything they can for their students, but are also struggling with changes in their family or loss in their family. So making it more accessible to our staff is going to be critical if we expect them to be there for our students.
And speaking of staff, we know we have lost almost 117,000 early education jobs. And I know that we have spoken about this privately before, but what strategies have you considered, are you working on to build a pipeline of students who are pursuing early childhood credentials and training that are going to be so necessary for our child care needs of the future?
This is an area of opportunity, much like Mr. Fleischman's questions with STEM. We must really reinvent, grow your own programs in our schools. I speak to Tennessee's program. They have a program in their high schools where students are going toward teaching, and there's a relationship between the high school and the college. In the budget, the request is $514 million, $280 million increase over the 22 enacted level to develop, grow your own programs, to invest in these teacher preparation programs. The shortages are real. They're going to get worse if we don't invest in them. And as I said in my opening remarks, in January, we dealt with school closures not because of Omicron, but because we didn't have the staff. And we can't afford that in this country.
In my brief 1 minute, we know how much LGBTQ students are facing attacks that are compounding this mental health crisis that we have been talking about. Can you tell me about how the increased funding for your Office of Civil Rights, what that funding will go to, and what is the level of need and cases being reported to the CRO that you're seeing?
A recent study by GLSEN found that LGBTQ students are bullied 42% compared to 15% of non-LGBTQ students. It is an issue that we're taking very seriously. Supporting the Office for Civil Rights will help us be more expedient in the investigations and ensure that all students are going to school in an inclusive environment that sees them, respects them, and welcomes them.
Thank you. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Ms. Herrera Butler.
I didn't have any space in the office. I was like so busy reading all my stuff.
Short-term
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. And I've just been, there's so many different things I wanted to talk with you about. I'm going to start, I think I'm going to start with with this, let's see, I'm going to start actually with the proprietary schools issue, because, you know, I'm a huge fan of Pell. I'm a big supporter of Pell. I think it helps non-traditional students, and I'm, you know, year-round Pell, increasing it. I think it just gives a lot of flexibility. And one of the things that has been brought to my attention is that there seems to be a real proprietary school ideology within the administration. And I know that there have been bad actors, but I also know there have been really bad actors in public, you know, school systems on the secondary level too. So I think apples to apples, there are similar challenges. But when I think about the population that do take advantage of proprietary schools, it's primarily women. It's a lot of 40-year-old women. Maybe I'm looking for a job. It's oftentimes it can be people of color or people who are looking for a second career or who maybe only have a high school degree but want to earn something more than minimum wage. And to tell that whole block of people, well, you don't fit the 4-year liberal arts academics, when the 4-year schools right now, especially the top, you know, not even the top schools, you know, middle schools, you know, middle range schools are not accepting. I mean, they have 50% acceptance rates, and that's a good acceptance rate. It seems to me you're cutting out a whole class of trade workers by refusing to support their desire to attend a proprietary school. Could you speak to that?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for that. And I agree with you. We have to create stronger career pathways. I'm really looking forward to making sure that all schools, high schools and 2-year schools, do more there. There are many great short-term programs that deliver great value to students. Last week I was at DC Central Kitchen.
I'm so sorry. I'm gonna cut into that really quickly, just because I'm gonna be cognizant of my time.
Okay.
I'm aware of current rulemaking at Department of Education surrounding eligibility requirements for programs authored by Title IV, and I have heard that cosmetology schools in my district feel like their opinions haven't been considered in this process, and it could threaten their ability to provide financial aid to their students. So I guess more specifically, as that rulemaking process moves forward, can you commit to actively at least engage with these schools and hear from them as you're making the rules about it?
Certainly. We definitely will, and I appreciate your advocacy, and we can provide a more detailed written response also.
I'd love that.
Happy to work with you on this.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I just think the non-traditional route needs to
understand.
be just as valued. I have brothers in the trades. They didn't go to a 4-year school, and I just think it's the way we need to look at higher education. Another piece along that line, I guess I'm going to switch over to the K-12 system. I received an email from parents in my district who said that due to a federal law, they needed to submit their child's demographic information to the school. And this is a public high school. It's my public high school district that I went to. I know that the Office of Civil Rights has taken steps to increase data collection on students and update definitions. But as you can understand, I mean, this basically says you're getting this message, this is from the school to the parent, because you haven't updated ethnicity information for your student due to new federal laws, yada, yada. We need to keep all this information. Of course, we're going to forward it onto the state, but we won't put your kid's name in there, which every parent has concerns about that privacy issue. Could these updated data collection requirements create an additional administrative burden for schools, and how do you plan to keep that information private?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. You know, student privacy. As a father of 2 high schoolers myself, I certainly want to make sure that they're protected and their information is private and is not everywhere else. I believe you're referring to the CRDC report, civil rights.
I don't know. The parent didn't know.
Yeah, okay. And I'd be happy to have a follow-up with you and even the school if necessary to make sure that it's clear for that parent what they're asking for. For us, ensuring that schools are providing students with opportunities to succeed, all students, regardless of race, gender, is critically important. So I believe it's referring to the CRDC report. Happy to follow up with you to get more on that.
And I have more questions. Some of them have to do with mental health, which I know we're going to talk about. Hopefully we'll get a second round of questions maybe. Okay, with that then I will yield back. Thank you.
Ms. Franco?
Oh, yeah. Hello. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you to Mr. Secretary. I want to ask you just a question on Title IX. I know that you are working on some new rules. Can you give us a progress report on that?
Sure. We are working on the new rules, and we're expecting next month that they are released in May. So I can't really get into specifics now, but at the end of the day, the goal is to make sure we have equal access, protect students against discrimination, and protect students against sexual violence.
Okay, thank you very much. Just another Title IX question. According to the research for the Women's Sports Foundation and the National Women's Law Center, girls of color have not benefited from Title IX the same way as white girls. And so Black girls face disadvantage both based on race and gender, and have lacked access to participation in school sports and other activities that are available to boys. Any comment on that? Any efforts that your department's going to make to remedy that?
Thank you for the question. You know, it's put in, Title IX was put in to ensure equal access, and we still have a ways to go. The question that I had before you asked the question was about the reporting that's done, the CRDC report. That helps us get information to ensure that regardless of race or place, students are getting a high quality education with equal access to extracurricular activities, to high level courses. And that's why we collect those data, to ensure that we're supporting districts, supporting states that are maybe inadvertently creating gaps in opportunities for students. This is our responsibility to make sure all students in the country have access. And looking at those data really makes us, it reinforces the important work that we're doing to collect those data, but more importantly, to provide support to our states and districts to make sure all students, regardless of race, socioeconomic status, have access to high quality learning and high quality after school activities.
So let me just do a follow-up, because I'm a big advocate for sports and children playing sports. It's not just fun, but they learn so much about themselves, about being part of a team. So this year marks the 50th anniversary of Title IX. Wow, that's unbelievable. And I know we have made a lot of progress. Still, I think there's research shows that the majority of high school administrators still don't know who their Title IX coordinator is, and that 83% of college coaches say they've never received formal Title IX training. So it's hard when people are ignorant of the law. Sometimes it makes it harder to enforce it, and it may be partial the reason why we still have this discrimination or lack of activities for especially for girls of color. Does your department have designated funding for training Title IX coordinators, and do you have any kind of plan of action on this effort?
Yes, thank you for that question. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Co-curricular activities, and I don't like to call them extracurricular because they're not extra, they're co-curricular activities, must be a part of the experience for our students. In fact, due to the American Rescue Plan, I put a challenge out there for every high school student to be connected in at least one co-curricular activity, whether it's theater, athletics, clubs. We should make sure that every student feels connected. And yes, the Department of Education, as we celebrate the 50th anniversary, have several events planned. We have had webinars. It's unfortunate, those data that you shared with me regarding the lack of understanding. We will be amplifying the importance of it, making sure that we can reverse those data that you shared. All athletic directors, all school leaders, all district leaders should make it very clear who the Title IX coordinator is, but more importantly, the purpose of Title IX and the importance of having access for all students.
Okay, so I agree with you on that latter point. So, but do you have plans to follow up to make sure that that happens?
Yes, we do.
You do, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know, I lost you off the screen. I don't know what happened to you, but I'll yield back. I do have another, I think, important question, but I'll yield back if we have another round. Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
Mr. Molinar, and we followed each other at the various hearings. So, and my apologies again to the committee that wound up being 2 subcommittees that I had to be at. So, Mr. Molinar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. And Mr. Secretary, good to see you again. I want to follow up with you on some of the questions Mr. Cole had raised regarding the charter school.
I still have to push back because I think we're still not.
And I guess, when I read some of the comments from previous presidents, President Obama once said that charter schools serve as incubators of innovation and give educators the freedom to cultivate new teaching models and develop creative methods to meet students' needs. And then when you think of President Clinton, when he celebrated
I think the member is muted.
in the Senate, the first charter schools legislation, he said that it puts the federal government squarely on the side of public school choice and innovative charter schools. And, when I heard you speaking earlier about transparency, accountability, fiscal responsibility, I think everybody would be in agreement that that's important in public education. What I'm concerned about is the proposed rule really seems like kind of a radical departure from this idea of allowing innovation, encouraging innovation, and specifically this community impact analysis at the expense of people trying to start a charter school. My experience with charter schools is they form in a variety of ways, but often it's parents, teachers coming together, seeing a need that's not being met, an opportunity, a tremendous amount of work and cost to start something up. And by putting sort of a one-size-fits-all federal rule that discourages that and creates more burdens, more costs, you're actually, whereas you may be, an advocate for high-quality charter schools, and I don't, I take you at your word on that, but what you're doing is, by this new rule, discouraging new innovation, discouraging people to take the risk to jump in and be part of this. And I like Mr. Cole, I think that the comment period is pretty tight, and I would just encourage you to consider extending that, really look through to see what can be done to encourage some of the things that you're talking about in terms of transparency, but at the same time not put a burden on people who are trying to do something innovative in a community because there's a need that's not being met. So I would just ask you if you'd consider that, think through that, and any feedback you have on that.
I appreciate that, Mr. Molinar, and I agree that and I've seen great examples of that, where people in the community come together, and we certainly don't want to discourage innovation or interest in this. And we do believe it's reasonable. What we're trying to protect is against closures, premature closures, because the need, or maybe there wasn't enough analysis done around the community need. But without question, we do know that charter schools can serve unique needs, and they're often incubators of innovation, and we want to continue to encourage that.
But when you say premature closures, are you talking about traditional schools or charter schools that would open and then close?
Correct.
Okay.
Under enrollment, or it seemed like there was an interest, and then a year or two later they're closing because there wasn't enough interest.
Okay. Well, my experience would be, I think the flexibility that's there between authorizers and, they certainly have the ability to start up, and if there's not a market there or there's not a need, then you kind of learn about that and you close. I understand that is disruptive. But at the same time, in the cases where it could be tremendously impactful, innovative, and really a good thing in the long term for a community, you just don't want those barriers to getting started.
I understand. Thank you.
Thank you. I yield back.
If I could just take 1 second, because I think you raised an interesting question, Mr. Molinar, and I would recommend an article, and I'll get it to you. There was an interesting statistic in it that more than 1 in 4 parents who walk their kindergartens into a new charter school have to find another school for their children by the time they reach the 5th grade. It's about the alarming closure rate of the schools. Over 1 in 4 closes during the first 5 years. By year 10, 40% are gone. Between 1999 and 2017, nearly 1 million children were displaced due to the closure of their schools. So an interesting thing to follow up on to see what the issue is, but I'll share that with you. Congresswoman Lawrence.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Secretary, for being here. I have a question. It's a follow-up on a response you gave on, I'm very excited about the career connection learning. We all know we have a staffing crisis, but the issue is the crisis is present. The connected learning, what is the expectation we can have for when we'll have a trained workforce that will be able to let us get parity with our need and with our workforce?
Thank you for the questions, Lawrence. And I have to go back to my visit. I went to Henry Ford Community College
Yes.
in Michigan. And let me tell you, like, if there was a model I could lift up, they get it. They understand that high schools can feed into two-year schools, and then the workforce partner is waiting. I visited Groton with Congressman Courtney, and the Groton submarine base was waiting for the graduates of those schools who were learning how to weld with the same machines they use on the sub base because the partnership was there. Unfortunately, across the country, we have pockets of excellence. It hasn't been systematized.
Right.
So what we're trying to do is make it so that every school, and not just technical high schools, which I'm a proud graduate of, not just technical high schools, but all comprehensive high schools have career options that are responsive to the community needs, to the regional needs. And I want to go a step further to say we would expect that districts and states have models of workforce partnership boards with our two-year college representatives, our four-year college representatives, our workforce partners representatives in our K-12 system so that the program feeds. Now, students should graduate with options. Unfortunately, in our country today, they don't. We have to do better. So the funding for the career-connected high schools is $200 million in new competitive awards to systematize it so that when a superintendent leaves, she doesn't leave with those great ideas and the system stays there. We really have to raise the bar there across the country. That's how we're going to become competitive. That's how our students are going to be able to get high-paying, high-skilled jobs earlier. They can continue with their college. In many cases, these workforce partners are paying for the college.
Okay.
So we have an opportunity here, and I really want to seize it.
So my next question goes to the mental health of our schools and our teachers, as has been mentioned. I just visited with my governor a school that has partnered with a community-based healthcare system that supports the school's mental health needs. Now, I saw that program being very, very effective because when we talk about putting enough staffing for mental health, and you talk about a pocket of excellence, I really want to encourage you to have a systematic plan to support these mental health providers in the community, because the mental health provider didn't have the restrictions or the normal parts. They were just there, and it was referrals that were able to be made by the school staff, nurse and social worker, and they were in the schools, and it was seamless. Our needs for our teachers and our parents. And the one thing that was brought to my attention during this meeting is that when you see the connection between mental health of our children, their crisis there, and the crisis of the parent, if we don't recognize that and do what we can to support the resources that's needed, it's going to become generational. So do you have any planning for that?
3 things I want to accomplish as Secretary of Education is close achievement gaps, improve career-connected pathways, and address the mental health needs of our students. In Santa Fe High School last week or 2 weeks ago in New Mexico, I saw a program that really could be replicated where our community partners, mental health partners, were in the school. They had space in the school, and they were connected to a university a research university. So that's taking that to that next level. But what we can do, kind of going to your first question, is not only connect our health centers to our schools and give them space there where even parents can come in and access it, but also create a throughway for our high school students to learn about fields in the healthcare industry and maybe even take some courses there or learn from the health experts that are in the building. That's another example where, as you mentioned, pockets of excellence are not going to get us where we need to go. Right. We have to systematize it. The funding request that we have here will move that along much quicker.
Okay. Thank you, and I'll yield back.
Congressman Klein.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you,
Hi.
Mr. Secretary, for joining us today. I don't know if you saw the news this morning that the U.S. economy saw a 1.4% decline in Q1 GDP growth of this year. Definitely, supply chain issues and inflation are the primary drivers of the decline that we've seen, but the pandemic policies of this administration that include massive trillion-dollar spending packages and economic restrictions like the ones we saw in my home state of Virginia under Democratic-led administrations started this ball rolling. $190 billion in COVID relief funds has been distributed by your department to be spent on preparedness and learning loss. We've all seen the stories of how some of these funds have been spent. For example, in a Whitewater, Wisconsin school district, the board voted to allocate almost 80% of their $2 million to build synthetic turf fields for the football team. An Iowa school district spent $100,000 of COVID relief money to renovate the weight room and add new floors. And now the district has recently reported more students interested in football. That's great, but the East Lyme, Connecticut school district spent $175,000 to address drainage problems on the baseball field. Pulaski County, Kentucky school district spent $1 million in COVID relief dollars on resurfacing 2 outdoor tracks. In March of 2021, the Government Accountability Office reported that the U.S. Department of Education system for tracking data was inadequate. Can you report on how you provide oversight for these federal investments to avoid this type of waste, and how many school districts are truly prepared for the future? What % of funding was spent on learning loss of students, because we saw that across the nation? And how is your agency using data to help understand the impact of these harmful school closures that we saw?
Thank you, Mr. Klein, for the question. And I agree wholeheartedly with you that we must ensure that these dollars are being used to address learning loss, the mental health needs, and it's something that we take very seriously at the department. As a matter of fact, the GAO report that you referenced, we instituted new protocols for oversight because we felt that the data collection was poor, and we had to fix that mess. There were several messes we had to fix. With regard to ARP accountability, I visited more than 100 sites, and the first question that I ask is, how is the ARP money being used? We're trying to lift best practices. We've had dozens of webinars with state chiefs, superintendents. I've spoken to hundreds of superintendents, visited their sites to make sure that we're very clear. Addressing learning loss or missed instruction is critical. Mental health needs of our students is critical, and making sure that our schools could be safely reopened. We're doing that. We're going to continue to do that. And a recent report from Future Ed reported that the projections of spending will go $30 billion toward academic recovery, which is exactly what you were asking for. $26 billion of the $130 billion in the K-12 space would go towards staffing, which include mental health support. $26 billion for infrastructure. And I have to say, some of the examples of what I've seen in my visits include deferred maintenance in buildings where air quality was really poor, so infrastructure is being fixed with the use of the American Rescue Plan. Schools are open today. We went from 46% of the schools open when President Biden took office, 99% open today because of the American Rescue Plan and their ability to get their schools open safely.
I think that one of the things that the American Rescue Plan also resulted in was the inflation that we're seeing today. The department just announced steps to further exacerbate this problem by dealing with student loan forgiveness. The federal student aid estimates that the changes you're proposing will result in an immediate debt cancellation for at least 40,000 borrowers under the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. More than 3.6 million borrowers will also receive at least 3 years of additional credit toward income drive repayment forgiveness. Can you tell me how the department plans to pay for the planning, implementation, and execution of these proposed forgiveness programs?
Thank you. We recognize that one of the things we had to fix when we came in was the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. It was enacted in 2007, was to take effect in 2017, and there was a 98% denial rate for those who qualified for it. So only 16,000 borrowers received forgiveness in the program. What we ended up doing was revisiting that program, fixing it, and as you mentioned, at least 40,000 borrowers were added to the list of borrowers who received loan forgiveness with the income-driven repayment changes. We are working really hard at FSA to build up systems of support for our students to make sure that they have the information, and we're processing their applications as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Yield back.
Congresswoman Bustos.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you. You were kind enough to come with the First Lady to Sauk Valley Community College, which serves the congressional district that I represent in the northern part of the state of Illinois. So thank you for that. I know you're on the road a lot and you have a lot of conversations. I had brought up to you at the time, we had a short discussion about teacher shortages, and that's what I'd like to talk with you about this morning. In the budget request, I was really, really happy to see that President Biden requested an increase in 400 teach grants awarded. So these students will receive $4,000 if they commit to teaching a high need subject in a high poverty school for 4 years. So really happy to see that. And we talked about this in your visit about teacher shortages continuing to be a major problem. I know this is affecting a lot of states all over our country. It is a big problem in the state of Illinois. And the Illinois State Board of Education says that Illinois school districts have about 4,100 unfilled positions right now. And that includes teachers, paraprofessionals, and other licensed staff. So Secretary Cardona, what I'd like to ask you is, what impact will the president's budget request have on teacher shortages, such as programs like the Teach Grant and through investments like the Teacher Quality Partnership Grant Program? I would love for you to address that if you could, please.
Thank you very much. Great to see you again. There's a $350 million in the budget to propose to support recruitment and retention efforts. Just yesterday, I was with the 50 State Teachers of the Year and the National Teacher of the Year, Kurt Russell, talking about the importance of the profession. And while it seems that the profession is under attack at times, and during the pandemic, there was a great support for teachers. Now it seems like teachers are being asked to do more and sometimes not given the respect that they deserve for what they've done during the pandemic. So it's a difficult time to recruit teachers. But in this budget, there's a clear commitment to making sure that we have enough teachers. And as mentioned with the question from Ms. Lawrence, we have to create grow your own programs in our districts. We have to create programs that get students thinking about becoming a teacher earlier on. I think of Tennessee's program where there's an apprenticeship available for students who want to become teachers. So the funding in the budget would allow us to create systems that help us ensure that we're not going to have teacher shortages. I made reference earlier to January when, because of quarantining, we didn't have enough teachers. We didn't have enough substitutes. That's unacceptable. Our students deserve better. This funding will allow us to create systems to make sure that we have pipeline programs for our teachers and programs that are embedded in our high schools that connect to our colleges to ensure that we have enough teachers moving forward, especially in those hard-to-fill areas like special education, bilingual education. We have to be proactive about this because it's unacceptable for students not to have highly qualified, prepared teachers in front of their classrooms.
And this plays into it, kind of part two of this in a sense, teacher salaries. Obviously, that's part of retaining teachers. It's part of attracting people to the profession. And as you know, it's the salaries are too low across the country in many, especially in low income districts. And in my home state of Illinois, we're working really hard to address this. But obviously, I think there's more that we can do even at the federal level to retain and to attract people to the profession. Last year, I introduced something that we call the Retaining Educators Take Added Investments Now Act. You know, we always like to come up with these acronyms. It's called the Retain Act. And along with other professions, the legislation, the Retain Act, it provides fully refundable tax credits for teachers in Title I schools. So the credit starts at $5,800 and then ramps up to $11,600 over the years to help retain staff. So, Mr. Secretary, how could increased Title I funding help school districts increase teacher pay and promote retention? And then part two of that is, what investments do you think we could put into programs that fight teacher shortages for this fiscal year?
Thank you for that, and I appreciate the efforts that you're taking to help address this issue. Imagine the headlines if we didn't have the American Rescue Plan funds to help incentivize teachers staying in the profession. We would be talking about schools being closed much more. So thank you for the support of the American Rescue Plan. I was talking to a principal yesterday who was telling me that in her state, the starting salary for teachers is in the 20,000s. That's unacceptable. That's unacceptable. So we need to do more. Pay does matter. Working conditions matter, and teacher voice matters. And to answer your question about Title I gives us the opportunity to ensure that there are enough reading specialists, that professional development is available to help these teachers become highly skilled in addressing achievement disparities that exist, and ensure that teachers have a competitive salary in urban districts or high poverty districts compared to their suburban counterparts. That's what Title I does.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. My time is out, and I will yield back to our chairwoman.
Thank you.
Congressman Harder.
Thank you so much, Chair DeLauro, for hosting today's hearing. And thank you, Secretary Cardona, for being here. I wanted to talk about doctors in the PSLF program. At the height of COVID, the ICUs in my community were over 100% capacity, not because we didn't have the bed space, but because we didn't have the doctors to take care of people. And one of the major contributors to that is that since the implementation of the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, doctors in California and Texas have been excluded from partaking in this program due to state laws prohibiting direct employment of doctors by hospitals. This disproportionately affects rural and underserved communities like mine. We have about half of our physician residents after they graduate who move away from our communities to go and work in another of the 48 states that are covered by this program. I have sent you 2 letters on this. And in the FY22 LHHS report, it urged the Department of Education to address this regulatory exclusion through negotiated rulemaking this year. One of the letters that I sent you was signed by 67 members of Congress, almost the entirety of the California and Texas delegations, telling you how important this issue is. But I'm very concerned that public documents released by the Department of Education throughout this rulemaking process indicate that the department either still does not understand how to fix this issue or is not prioritizing fixing it. Specifically, the proposed language that has been suggested still requires a W-2 form for their employers, which would continue to exclude 100% of California and Texas doctors because they don't get W-2 forms, even if they work at a nonprofit hospital, because they're banned from working directly for hospitals in California and Texas. So, Secretary Cardona, will you commit to having the department fix this exclusion of otherwise qualifying doctors in California and Texas from the PSLF program this year?
Thank you for the question, Representative, and for your advocacy for these heroes who during the pandemic have bent over backwards to protect lives. As you're aware, the rule related to PSLF is under OMB review, and we hope to publish a notice of proposed rulemaking in the spring. And I know you've been in communication, and my staff will continue to be in communication with you about this issue. And I appreciate your advocacy here, and as we try to work toward a solution.
Thank you. I just really want to emphasize to you and to your team that the proposed fix does not fix this issue, and every single physician in California and Texas will still be excluded. And it's frankly a little confusing to me that after all the hullabaloo that's happened because of this problem, that the negotiated and proposed language still falls short of our goal here. Can I at least get your commitment, that understanding that you will do everything that you can to make sure that California and Texas doctors who meet all other PSLF requirements receive PSLF support?
I understand the problem. I commit to, number one, having a conversation with you specifically about this to hear your perspective. Although I have read the letters and have had conversations, I want to make sure that you feel that I'm giving you my best here to support the doctors in Texas and in California.
Thank you. And I just want to underscore that this is bipartisan, bicameral. We have enormous support around this because it'll lead to 10,000 physicians working in underserved communities in California over the next 10 years. It's a major game changer, and especially after what we've seen in COVID, I think now is the time to make sure that we are getting this addressed. And I want to make sure that the department understands how their current proposed language falls short. I'd like to also enter, Madam Chair, two documents into the record. The first is my bill language for HR 1133, the Stopping Doctor Shortages Act. The second document contains 3 language proposals that also fix the exclusion of qualifying California and Texas doctors from the PSLF program without impacting other healthcare professionals or allowing non-qualifying doctors to receive PSLF support. We know there's good language out there. Here's our 3 suggestions that do address this problem, and I would really encourage the department and the secretary to take a good, strong look at this, and I appreciate your offer to have a conversation on that. I'm more than willing to do that anytime. So thank you again, Secretary Cardona, for testifying, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you.
Congresswoman Watson-Coleman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for holding this hearing, and it's good to see you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you very much for being here. I am always interested in equity of opportunity, providing the opportunities for our children to be globally educational competitive, irrespective of where they live. I'm also very concerned about all of the sort of research that we found lately that demonstrates that children of color, particularly Black girls, are disciplined more than their white counterparts for the same infractions. I am concerned that there have been issues of discrimination because of because of their hair, because of their dress codes and things of that nature. I'm impressed that you all have actually noted the challenge and the desire to ensure that educational opportunity is more evenly distributed and available. New Jersey is one of the most segregated states in the nation when it comes to K through 12 schools. So my question to you is, while you have this commitment, what is it that you are actually going to do or be able to do that will positively impact the minority child's experience in the school? What will you do to prepare teachers? What will you do to prepare the administration? What kind of training, bias training, et cetera, is going to be made available? And how will you hold those institutions accountable who are not doing the things that you expect them to do? And what measures can be used to ensure their accountability and responsiveness?
Thank you for the question. As I said earlier, the focus during my time as secretary will be to address disparities in this country, provide better access to college and career, and to support students' mental health needs, as we know they're greater now. To your question, there are several things in the budget proposal that will support our efforts, our specific efforts to diversify the staff in our schools, to make sure that the professional staff in our schools represent the beautiful diversity of this country. Ensuring that Title I schools have the support that they need so that they can have that intervention, that small group instruction, that evidence-based, those evidence-based strategies that we know close reading gaps, and address the needs that our students have academically. We want to make sure that we're continuing to disaggregate data to ensure that all students are accessing public education adequately and equally, and that they have the same opportunities for co-curricular activities, access to AP courses, access to higher education. So we are monitoring these things. We are more accessible. I said in the beginning, I want our agency to be a service agency. I want us out in the field. I want us talking to educators, teachers, principals, and we're working with them to make sure that we're building capacity. We're providing greater oversight, and we're being very clear about if you're using federal dollars, or even if you're not using federal dollars, the expectation is that all students have an opportunity to succeed. I opened with, I'm a beneficiary of public schools and everything that this budget asks for. And I expect that for all students across the country. The budget will help us get there.
So do these school districts and the states understand what you expect of them? And what will happen if they're not even achieving or attempting to achieve those things that you think are very important and achievable that the federal government supports in terms of funding? And I guess what is it that you actually think the federal government can do tangibly to desegregate these schools? Do you really believe that these segregated schools, particularly in the lower income communities, can provide all of these educational opportunities and innovations that are available? What can you actually tangibly do to help desegregate?
Thank you. First of all, I do believe the state chiefs, the superintendents, principal groups, teacher groups, they are aware of what we're doing because we're at the table with them and they're at the table with us. And I believe we had a shared purpose. It's just a matter of drilling down and looking at those places where it's not working, building capacity through technical assistance, and ensuring that the funding is being used for the right things, but also holding them accountable and withholding funding if the actions go against equitable outcomes. That's what we're working on.
Yeah, I want you to know that in closing, I am very supportive of community schools. And I think the community schools that have diversity of services to both the child and the parent, and that even finds educational/recreational opportunities and after school hours is vitally important to our communities. And I strongly support it, and anything I can do to that end with you, please count on me. Thank you. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you.
Congressman Harris.
Thank you very much, and I apologize, but we have the Ag, as
Yes.
you know, because you appeared
Right.
before us.
Right.
We have the Ag Subcommittee. And, well, thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. I want to follow up first on something that the gentlelady from Washington brought up. You know, Elon Musk famously tweeted back in December of 2021, the fact that an 18-year-old can't take out a $10,000 business loan but can take out a $100,000 student loan tells you everything you need to know. So I have a question for you because, you know, the gentlelady brought up the issue of the importance of trade skills. And so, for instance, I met with the new car dealers. They can't find mechanics. Like, literally, they can't find them. You know, when a mechanic finishes their VOTEC training, for instance, a set of tools costs them $15,000 or $20,000. Without that set of tools, they got to go work for somebody else. They can't work for themselves. Nobody's going to lend them $15,000 or $20,000 out of school, but they have a marketable skill, a valuable marketable skill. Why don't we lend them money? Why do we lend them money to go to a 4-year college to study something in the humanities that may or may not bear any fruit, and not lend the person who just learned a skill to get started in being a vibrant part of our economy?
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Harris. As a former automotive technician student myself in high school, I had to buy those tools, and I know what you're talking about. And I fully support making sure we have better access to careers. I fully support creative pathways there and those that give students opportunities to try different pathways that maybe don't exist now. I'm fully supportive of that.
Great, thank you very much. So I'm going to spend the last few minutes just on my concern about the charter proposed rules. And I know you've addressed it again. I'm sorry I couldn't listen to everything that was said. But, you know, in Maryland, I was there on the Education Committee in the State Senate when we passed the charter school bill. It was to help black students in Baltimore City. There were successful charter schools which were almost entirely minority. So when you come out with a proposal that a charter must serve a diverse population, These were actually designed to serve a non-diverse population in Baltimore City, a population that was underserved, that didn't have educational choice. When you say that, the community impact analysis has to have evidence of over-enrollment of existing public schools, that's not the issue. It's not that there aren't public school spaces available, it's that those public schools are failing and parents get the choice to charter schools. So are you aware of these concerns?
I am, and I do believe proposals are reasonable. I said at the beginning, before we were here, I remember when I was in Connecticut, one of the last presentations before COVID shut everything down was Stanford Excellence Charter School. The achievement in that school was amazing, and we lifted it up as a great example. I know in Rhode Island there's a great learning community charter school. Involves parents in ways that we want to see across the country. So we know there are great examples, and my department's technical support assistance is going to be available to help any school that wants to open to be successful. So I think these are reasonable, but I do understand that there's a lot of concerns. There's a lot of misinformation, and there's a lot of myths that maybe we're not in support. I am in support of high-quality public
Thank you very
charter
much.
schools.
So I did tune into a little part of your comments
good.
where you said you support quality schools.
I
And
do.
you're right. Look, some charter schools weren't quality schools, but some really are. And please don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Finally, I'm a strong advocate for the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program. I am very glad that the administration in this year's budget did not include the phase-out language. That was very disappointing to me. This is a program that serves overwhelmingly minority students, where the parents have waiting lists. They do the lotteries for this. I mean, these parents really want this to exist, and I'm glad that the administration realized that and then took out the phase-out language. I'm also glad they didn't include the poison pill language, the language that would look at the Title IX religious exemptions through a lens that basically would disallow a lot of the schools. This is just a great, giving parents choice in a failing school system is a good idea, not a bad idea. I get it, it's controversial, I get it, union opposition. Again, I lived through it all in Maryland when I was in the state Senate. I urge you, again, to support programs like this that are broadly supported by parents, where we can demonstrate that there is a quality aspect to the education. And again, I thank you for being, I apologize for being so late. I thank the chair for her indulgence, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Congressman Pocan.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Cole. I also was one of those folks late because of the agricultural hearing, so I want to say happy birthday to Ranking Member Cole. Hopefully there's a quality cigar in your day at some point. Several. Good. Want to make sure. Since a lot of the questions were asked, let me just hit a couple points and then I'll ask a few questions. One, I have great concern on the teacher shortage issue as well. In fact, Madam Chair, it might be good to have a special hearing on this sometime because I think it's such a big issue. I think the way you broke it down on pay and conditions and teacher voice is very accurate, and there's challenges on all three. We saw the conditions with COVID and what's happened to teachers. We've seen places like Wisconsin where they've attacked public employee unions, and we've watched the devastating numbers of people not applying to go to become teachers. In my main school district, it used to be almost impossible to get in as a teacher. Now they have positions where they only get 2 or 3 applicants for a teaching position. So this is a real issue, and I think whatever we can do to, I appreciate what you have in the budget, but I think there's probably more we are also going to need to do. Second, perhaps a little different than the ranking member on this, on the charter programs, I really appreciate the direction you're doing with the extra scrutiny and efforts. Wisconsin was one of the first states to have those back now almost 30 years ago. Yes, there were some rough periods that we've corrected where we gave money to people who opened schools who said they could read a book by putting their hand on it, and all sorts of interesting ways, but we still don't have the performance out of them. And I think when you look at the statistics that were given by the chairwoman, I'm glad we have that extra scrutiny. Completely agree with Representative Herrera Butler on Pell. I went to school because I had Pell grants, and I'm not lifting the ladder up. I'm trying to make sure we're going to continue to try to double those Pell grants. Thank you for those efforts. And I guess where I'll get to a question now is I agree with what Representative Clark and others said about the Office of Civil Rights budget. I'm especially concerned that there's a trend among some states to have these so-called don't say gay laws, and they're going to have some really big impacts, again, on teachers, but also on students. And, specifically in that area, are there some strategies that you're looking? Because I've got the feeling you're going to have a lot of potential firings and expulsions and others because of those laws.
We are asking for an increase of almost $26 million. It really, it's one of our primary responsibilities to ensure all students have access to a school that's inclusive, where they feel welcomed. And that's what we heard from students. And that's what we heard from parents. We've been listening to parents. They want their children to feel welcomed and embraced. And what we're finding now across the country is that we have to be proactive to ensure that we're out there and communicating with these educators and these policymakers that are introducing policies that go against that. Our Office for Civil Rights is prepared. But what we want to do is build a culture of inclusivity. We really need to be proactive about this. OCR alone is not going to take care of this. We need to create a culture of acceptance and inclusion for all of our students. I recently visited students in Florida and parents who told me, all I want is for my kid to come back, just like every other parent. Go back into school, make up for some lost time during the pandemic, and feel welcome, feel accepted. And that's under attack. And we're not going to tolerate it. We need to support every student, including our transgender students who are under attack in many places. As Secretary of Education, I need them to know I've got their back, and the Office for Civil Rights is here to support and take investigations if we have requests for them, because we take this very seriously. That's something that we're not going to compromise on.
Thank you. And then two questions around financial aid that have been brought up from my district. One, around FAFSA. There's been repeated verification points for the issue of requiring students to apply for that annually. I believe there might have been some relief around that through COVID in the requirement to reapply. Is there a way to start looking at those multiple year applications that you don't have to every single year apply for it when people are looking for a 4-year degree, so that you could have less disruption? And secondly, there was, again, some relief during COVID around Pell Grants. And to the same end, if it was possible to have some of the relief that we had during that time period continue, we know there's going to be negligible effects, but there's a lot of paperwork involved, and also holds back some families from being able to apply on the income verification side. Could you address those 2 points?
Sure, and they're connected in some ways, and I have to first acknowledge the dedicated people, career staffers in FSA who have been working tirelessly to work on the systems that we're trying to improve. What we're trying to do is work closely with our servicers also to make sure that they're supported throughout this process, while also simplifying and making sure we have the data that we need without creating more paperwork or more challenges, more obstacles to this process. We'll continue to do that, and I look forward to hearing more from you and your team to see what we can do to continue to improve that process.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Chair.
That concludes the first round of questions here, and it appears that we have some time and that we can allow for a 3-minute round of questions. So it really, for the quality of the discussion, et cetera, is really, it's rich, and it's so critically important. I would just say to Mr. Pocan, I love the idea of a hearing with regard to teacher shortage, and we're going to take you up on that and pursue it. So thank you. I think it's a very, very big issue. Mr. Secretary, I'd like to, say thanks with regard to the great work of you and your staff on borrower defense. More than 100,000 defrauded borrowers have received loan discharges under the borrower defense repayment provision, but we've got another tens of thousands of additional borrowers who are waiting for their claims to be adjudicated. I just read the article that was handed to me coming out today. Education Department approves $238 million group discharge for 28,000 Marinella Schools of Beauty borrowers based on borrower defense findings. I think it's interesting. I know my colleague, Ms. Herrera Butler, talked about for-profit cosmetology schools being worried about regulation. But if you take a look at the article, and what was found here is that this was the department found schools failed to train students in key elements of cosmetology program, how to cut hair, I mean, some very basic things, so that cracking down on these schools that are predators is really critically important. Tell me what you are. I know we're waiting for a borrower defense rule. In the meantime, what are you trying to do to adjudicate these outstanding defense claims for groups?
Thank you. You mentioned today's announcement. Prior to that, over $2 billion in relief through borrower defense for 105,000 borrowers who were taken advantage of, misled. We really need to send a message that we're not going to let that slide, that these practices of taking advantage of students trying to chase that American dream is something that we're going to be monitoring more closely. I'm proud of the enforcement team being brought back up under Richard Cordray's very capable leadership. It's really creating a new culture to make sure that the return on investment for our students is there, so that they are not saddled with debt for the rest of their life, earning low income. So I mentioned borrower defense. We're feeling similarly with income-driven repayment. We're feeling the same way with public service loan forgiveness. A lot of attention is on broad loan forgiveness. We are working really hard, especially this first year, to fix systems that are broken, that were not working for students, and borrower defense is one of those.
Okay, and I just would mention, I mean, the students and the taxpayers are the ones who should be worried about what is happening here, and there's overwhelming data that talks about what attorneys generals have found about misleading students, harassing students, worthless degrees, major student debt. That has to be drummed out of the system. Right. That's what we have to do. No one is saying, let's give people technical education. It's critically important to do that. And we can work with that, work with businesses, we can work with community colleges, and getting the people what they need and the technical credentials to move. But we cannot allow corruption to take advantage of our kids or of the federal tax dollars. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I now yield to the ranking member, Mr. Cole.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I've got two quick questions. One you might want to take for the record, but you may know off the top of your head. What percentage of the $76 billion in higher education emergency relief funds remain unspent, and how does the department plan to make sure that that money is actually used for COVID-related purposes? My friend Mr. Klein pointed out we certainly have some egregious examples where people, I think, misuse the money for things that none of us envisioned they would spend it on.
Thank you, Ranking Member Cole. I'll get you specific numbers. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I will tell you in my visits to higher education institutions, I've seen a shift. These institutions understand they have to meet the students where they are. In many cases, food insecurity, housing insecurity, dealing with some basic needs, books, not only tuition support, but I think if it weren't for the money in the higher education space, we would be talking about colleges closing. We would be talking about a dropout rate that's much higher. What I have seen anecdotally and stories of students who've told me, I'm only here because of the funds that the school is providing that they wouldn't have had if it weren't for that. So I can get more information to you, but I can tell you firsthand.
I'd appreciate it, because I agree very much with your basic point. Look, this money was necessary, right. And so I don't quibble with that. I do worry, since it was an unprecedented new program, it's pretty
Right.
easy. You don't have controls set up. I just want to make sure, because I've seen some pretty egregious examples of money spent on things that I know nobody on this committee on either side of the dais would have approved of. Second question quickly, and this may call for a longer discussion another time, is Title I, where, again, I think the purpose of the money is a really worthy purpose. I am concerned that we spend a lot of Title I money, and a lot of times we don't see much difference in performance over time in the places where, I'm not disagreeing where it's targeted, I'm wondering whether or not we are doing the things we need to actually use the money to get a better result for students. So can you just quickly give me some of your thoughts on that and how we can improve the performance to follow the dollars?
Thank you, Mr. Cole, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. Money doesn't always mean success if it's not being used well. That's why I'm proud to be an educator and be able to say, if these funds are being used, they better be used for evidence-based practices. Deputy Secretary Cindy Martin has been working really closely with our Office of Elementary and Secondary Education to ensure that good teaching principles, good leadership principles are being used with these funds. We both have served as educators at different levels, and we're really interested in making sure that there's a good return on investment, not only for the students, but for the taxpayers who are funding this.
If you could, and my time's about up, so you don't have to, but if you could get us some information on that shows where the dollars have actually markedly improved performance, and what are the reasons why that worked? In other words, what are the things we did with the dollars that actually help kids get a better outcome? Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Congresswoman Roybal Allard.
Mr. Secretary, this year we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the federal TRIO Veterans Upward Bound program, which helps military veterans prepare to re-enter the academic pipeline. A Department of Education study found low-income and first-generation veterans who participate in the TRIO Veterans Upward Bound program were 42% more likely to complete a degree than those who did not participate in the program. Can you address what steps the department is taking to improve college access and completion for our veterans through this program or any other program that you may have?
Yeah. I can tell you in some of my visits, some of the best stories are of our veterans who had access to higher education and their family had access to resources for all of them to find success. We have worked closely with veterans groups, and we've had them in the department telling us how we can improve programming, how we can work together with DOD and Department of Veteran Affairs to make sure that the communication to them is streamlined. We will continue to work with them and to make sure that they have access to the programs and the benefits that are due to them. They've served our country, and it's important for us at the department that they feel that we're supporting them in their process of accessing higher education.
Mr. I have several questions
Okay.
that I won't have the time for, but I will submit them for the record. But
Please.
I just do want to make one point, and that has to do with the issue that has been brought up by my colleagues with regards to trade schools.
Sure.
And I just want to point out that in addition to the financial support and other things that have been talked about, I think it's also important for the Department of Education to change public attitude about going to a four-year college versus going to a trade school. And then just quickly, let me just give you one example of what I'm talking about. I was talking with some parents in my district, and they were bragging about their oldest child who was going to a four-year college, and how proud they were of him. And when I asked about, well, what about your other son, they were almost apologetic in telling me that son was going to a trade school. And I think that there's various reasons, historical reasons, for that being the way it is. But I think it's important that we find a way to give the same kind of status to those who go to a four-year college and those who get a degree in some kind of trade school, for all the obvious reasons that have been mentioned. And I think the Department of Education can be helpful in helping the public and parents understand that both have tremendous value.
Absolutely. As a graduate of a technical high school, I couldn't agree more. We do have more work to do to change the culture, the stigma that's unfortunately associated with it. There are high-paying, high-skilled jobs out there. I remember visiting a place in Michigan. I can't think of the name of the school now, but it was a graduate program. The students that were studying plumbing were going into jobs making six figures when they left with very little debt. They're doing pretty well. We have to change the stigma, and I'm excited to do that work. Thank you.
Well said, both of you. We have another member of the committee that has joined us.
Beautiful member.
Can you introduce her, Mommy?
Hi, I'm Asana May.
Okay. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Reverend Butler.
I don't know if anybody can handle. That would be tough. That'd be a tough question. I wanted to ask, kind of following up along this, I agree with the chairwoman that that corruption and defrauding students and the American taxpayer should never be tolerated. I am in no way afraid of any kind of investigation into someone who is a bad actor, like full stop. I do think, though, my challenge is there are not similar applications of I feel like justice being applied. You know, one of the things, the Madam Chair, and I agree with this, she said, we cannot allow corruption with federal tax dollars, worthless degrees, and thousands of dollars in debt. Well, any average person watching this might think we're talking about, you know, one of the many students who went to a 4-year liberal arts degree and has hundreds, in some cases, of $1,000 in debt, and they're working as baristas. You know, right now, we have over 1 million workers just disappeared from the economy, and your administration that you work with is talking about forgiving their debt, and I'm thinking, and we're trying to get rid of trade schools. One way we can make this whole thing work is if we change the stigma, root out the bad, and apply that same level of justice. And it was frustrating to me as this rulemaking process is happening that I have good acting trade schools that provide good jobs in my district who are saying, Department of Ed won't respond to us. It's not even that they're giving us bad information or they don't like us. It's that they won't respond to us. That's not appropriate. And I would like to see that same measure being applied to our 4-year schools. Is it still true that financial aid counselors cannot counsel a student? Yeah, you're taking out all this debt, yet your degree isn't going to help you pay that off. Like, it has been the rule that financial aid counselors can actually point that out to students. I think we need to rejig. I agree that the system needs to be cleaned up. Yeah. And let me add to that, nursing. Nursing is another area. If you're talking about forgiving loans, I know that you're talking about the Public Health Service Corps and the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Programs. Those are great. But if you're going to talk about widespread forgiving of, you know, everybody's loans, federal taxpayers need to have some benefit there. So why can't we consider asking those people to serve in high critical need areas? If you're going for a psychology or psychiatry degree, maybe help serve in a child care desert. You know, maybe you should put in the same 5 years of service that a health service corps person would do to get that loan forgiveness. I think that needs to be considered. So that's a lot. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I welcome an opportunity to have more conversation about how you're perceiving it, what you're hearing, and how we can, at the Department of Education, be more service-oriented to those who might feel like they're not hearing from us. Thank you.
Congresswoman Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I was delighted to see in your budget another $616 million to help simplify the FAFSA process. I think few forms for students looking to further their education and families that support them create more of a daunting process than that particular form. So I'd love a brief update on where you are with that. And in particular, we have been looking at the issue for homeless, foster, and justice-involved youth, that even a simplified process is still very difficult. So I'd love to hear about your strategies for helping those students enroll and complete their post-secondary education.
Thank you. I couldn't agree with FAFSA simplification anymore after having gone through the process with my own son several months ago. And as you know, the deadline was extended, but I am glad to say that homeless and foster provisions won't have to wait another year. That will be ready for the following year. We can't have a program that's intending to help students that need additional help make it so hard for them to understand it or their parents to understand it. I can tell you, one of my son's friends called my son and said, could your father help my mother with the FAFSA because she doesn't understand it? And that told me, and she knew that I'm in education. So he said, well, I'll call him. The process has to be much easier. It has to be accessible to those who need it most. There can't be barriers there that make someone think it's easier just to forget and ignore that. That's unacceptable. And I'm glad we are moving forward toward simplification. I wish it could be ready now. But I am happy that for the homeless and those in foster care, they don't have to wait another year, that theirs will be ready in 23-24.
And I know this is primarily a state issue, but one of the other factors that has come up, especially for foster youth, but it really applies across the board for some of our more vulnerable populations, is aging out of foster care.
Right.
And 21 states still have not extended the age limit. But in a recent visit to a community college, talking to the administration and students, even with the extended age of 23, with all the interruptions of the pandemic, the high cost of housing, food insecurity, I think we have to think about a different way that we address these needs and help these students finish without an arbitrary age cutoff. It just doesn't reflect the reality of many, many students, but also especially of homeless and former foster youth. We need to make sure that we're looking at that, and it's often a state issue, but I'm hoping we can collaborate and think about solutions.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and especially now after the pandemic, where so many have faced a disruption that might have taken them off course for a little bit.
Right.
I'm very eager to learn more about this and maybe work with you to hear specific examples of what things we can do to help that process along. Thank you.
Thank you. We will follow up. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Frankel.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Well, the governor of Florida has decided to be the leader in the cultural war of extremism in our country. And I know Mr. Pocan talked to you about the situation with what he calls it, the Don't Say Gay law, but I want to talk to you about the woke bill. The woke bill is aimed at limiting how schools and colleges and businesses discuss race. It blocks any instruction that could hint at one race feeling guilt for past actions or that their race necessarily determines a person's status as a privileged or oppressed. Now, I want to just say I was at the Museum of African American History the other day, and if anyone who hasn't been there, I just urge you to go there. And the first exhibit that I saw was had all these slave ships and showed how human beings were packed in these horrible, awful conditions. And I have to say, I had very strong emotions, all kinds of emotions, whether it was sadness or guilt or whatever. And I just do not understand how. I mean, it seems to me that under Florida law now, children are not going to be able to be taught about slavery. One district recently canceled a workshop on the civil rights movement out of fear of violating the new law. And, what my constituents are asking me is, can the federal government do anything to intervene against this craziness, this horrible effort by the state of Florida to basically block teachers from telling the truth? Or have students having any emotional feeling when they hear the facts?
We, as a lifelong educator myself, I know the importance of making sure our students feel engaged in learning. And while the Federal Department of Education doesn't have a role in curriculum, to me, it's really important as an educator, as a father, that our students are engaged and proactively introduced to the beautiful diversity that has made this country the most amazing experiment in the world. But that includes, our history, that includes parts that we're not proud of. I trust that.
I understand that I agree with you, but is there anything that the Office of Civil Rights can do about this effort in Florida?
What the Office for Civil Rights can do is thoroughly investigate any requests for investigations around lack of rights of students. And, I can't speak prematurely to that, but I will tell you, we do believe that students should have quality programming, and we are concerned with some of the policies that are less curriculum, more about division, more about bringing politics into the schools. I said at the onset, our schools should not be the place for culture wars. Our parents want our children to recover from what was missed during the pandemic, for the missed instruction. They want the mental health needs of their students cared for. They want all students to feel welcome. That's what our parents are asking for. We're not going to get distracted going into the culture wars, but I also encourage our state leaders and our local leaders to make sure that they're also in the conversations around what our students need. And I know that our educators and parents want the same thing for their kids. They want their children to learn in an environment that's inclusive, that's welcoming, and that teaches the truth.
Thank you. Yield back. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Congresswoman Watson Coleman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary, the whole notion of community schools is something that we explored with about 3 or 4 governors ago, when Governor Florio believed that a school should be a community outreach. Parents can come there and get services they need. Children get services they need. School doesn't end at 3. I'm so excited about those. I really believe that they are an answer to a lot of our issues in our particularly underserved community. So I thank you for the work that you all are doing. I look forward to that expanding.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to just draw your attention to the HBCUs and the TCCUs and the MSIs. I know that you all recognize the significance of them, the importance of them, and that's recognized in the budget because of the investments that you have increased in those areas. Could you please speak to the importance and impact of better funding these universities that primarily care for students of color?
They care for students of color, but they punch above their weight. HBCUs, for example, only 3% of our colleges and universities are HBCUs, yet they're producing tenfold the percentage of Black doctors, judges, attorneys. So for us, this is really about making sure that we're supporting institutions that have historically been underfunded and don't have the endowments in many cases that other universities have, but are producing high quality graduates and are contributing in positive ways to our economy. So for me, my visits to not only HBCUs, but MSIs and HSIs and TCCUs underscore the importance of supporting these institutions that are helping next generation of, many times first generation college students, find success and achieve that American dream. So it is a great investment, not only for these institutions, but for our economy and for our country.
I think that your budget proposal, the president's budget proposal, definitely moves in the right direction in so many areas that are important to us. And I look forward to working with you, and I thank you for all the work that you've done and for the insights that you shared based upon your lived experiences, which are very important and very relevant.
Thank you.
I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I will ask the ranking member if he has any closing statement.
Yeah, just a few, and thank you, Madam Chair, and it's wonderful to be back here, and maybe next time in our own room. But this is still good, and Mr. Secretary, it's always a pleasure to have you. I come away from our hearing with 4 conclusions. One, I would ask you to really look carefully, Mr. Secretary, at this charter school issue. We had 4 different members on our side raise concerns about that, and I think they reflect what their governors are thinking in many cases, or certainly what their constituents are. So we have a lot of concerns in that area, and we're going to continue probably to push pretty hard on that. Second, I would ask you, and you acknowledge this, to look at impact aid in Indian education. Again, I understand why the numbers are a little bit lower, but I think we could probably all agree those are areas that we want to continue to work on. Certainly Native American education. I know a lot of that's actually in the interior budget. That's a whole nother discussion for another time as to where that would be appropriately funded, but we'd certainly like to see some increases there. Third, on a very hopeful note, as I draw away and I listen to all the comments and your testimony, I see some terrific areas of cooperation, and they're pretty traditional for us here. Special education is something I think we all feel strongly about with IDEA in particular. Early childhood has been a favorite of this committee on both sides of the aisle for quite a few years. first-generation college students. I think we all think that's an investment that's not only a good investment, but helps us deal with inequities that we know exist over time. And finally, and your background probably make you especially sensitive here, career and technical education, where, again, as you pointed out in your testimony, there are some terrific job opportunities for kids, and we need to make sure that we don't disparage the 70% that choose to do another route than the traditional 4 years, and that can often lead to a very, very good outcome, and we don't want to miss those opportunities. Finally, the last thing I'll say is just renew my commitment. Probably the best gift we can get you. Of course, you want everything that you would ask for, and that's fair enough. But the best thing we could do for you is get you something on time, and make sure that you've got the time to implement. So I want to reiterate, I want to work very closely with my chairwoman, whom I admire a great deal, and try to make sure that we get this done closer to the time so that you've got the full amount of time to implement these things. We got you a budget I'm pleased to have voted for, but we got it to you awfully late, and I know that's made things very difficult for your department. We're going to try and do a better job. And if we don't do a better job, I can assure you it won't be the fault of the House of Representatives or our chair. It'll be the fault of the United States Senate. So we're going to push them pretty hard, too. So thank you, and thank you for the hearing, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member.
Thank you very much, and I too, I'm committed to seeing that we can get these bills done in time for people to be able to utilize the resources that they need and not wait several months before they can do that. And I want to thank the ranking member for his assistance in getting the bill, the omnibus, over the finish line, and he knows that I welcome his support, and I will ask for his support and help and guidance as we try to make it through the next go round. And this afternoon we will have a meeting with the Four Corners, and I'm optimistic about having a good direction, and one that where everyone understands the need to move quickly. Just a couple of points. We talked about the issue of technical schools and having youngsters be able to really realize their dreams and their aspirations. The fact is that 70% of people in the United States do not have a 4-year college degree, nor, if you can, fine, and if you can't, that's fine. But that means that all the more reason why we have to address what is important to 70% of the people in this nation, and that is critical in making sure that those institutions are the very best and are providing the kind of instruction that allows them to realize those dreams and aspirations. I would say I understand Ms. Herrera Butler's need. She has that little urchin there that needed to run off with. But I would just say, because at the outset in my questioning, I talked about a private institution, University of Southern California, and what it costs for their master's degree program and what they're doing. So we need to root out that kind of I call it corruption. I really do. Out of wherever it is, to provide youngsters with what they need. And you started out, and I did as well, Mr. Secretary, that talked about. I talked about Horace Mann. Education beyond all other divides of human origin is a great equalizer. Education is the great equalizer. There isn't a person on this panel here, or even out there, whose parents have said to them, get yourself an education because it is the route to success. Your family said that to me. That's what my parents told me, over and over again, and the parents sacrificed to make sure that happened, so that we could realize our own dreams and aspirations. But no child should be denied a quality education because of their parents' economic circumstances, or where they are born, or if they have a disability, or their ethnicity, or their race, their gender. It is that's not who we strive to be. And I know that that's the heart and soul of where you are. And so that, and as I said, that education is the great equalizers. And it's our teachers, it's our public schools, our universities. They are more essential now than ever to be fulfilling that effort. Our job is, and you talked about at the outset, the numbers are important because we have to take a look at what the funding is, et cetera. But what is the underlying mission? What needs to propel us to get those opportunities out to youngsters, whether it's K through 12 or post-secondary? How do we do that? We now have a new set of challenges as well. We have serious mental health issues with our kids. We have people who are struggling with hunger, housing costs with college, students. There are disparities which are there. We have outside forces today that want to create a new dynamic around education and use teachers in many respects and scapegoat teachers. This is it's tough. It really is. So we have to kind of navigate our way through. And I want to commend to you, because I think that your background, your experience is what we critically need at this juncture to navigate education. And absolutely, people are not always going to agree on everything. We will disagree, but as the ranking member said, we do it with civility. We do it with the goal in mind. That's where we need to go in the course of our nation's history. What is the goal? And on both sides of the aisle, like they did in the past when they created a social safety net in this country, it was Democrats and Republicans coming together and saying, this is the challenge. How do we get there? And that's, we want to help you get there, and that's what our goal will be here. And with that, I thank you. I thank your team for all that you do and your commitment to our youngsters' education. So thank you. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.